Welcome to the story of Daniel, a boy who started his journey feeling invisible and isolated, but ended up becoming a symbol of courage and inspiration for an entire community. At Green Valley High, Daniel faced unfairness and rejection. He was ridiculed, ignored, and made to feel like he didn't belong. But instead of giving up, Daniel found the strength to rise above the odds. His journey wasn't easy, but it became a powerful reminder of how one voice, one action, can ignite change. What would you do if the world seemed to turn its back on you? Would you stay silent or stand up for what's right? This is a story of resilience, hope, and the power of standing tall in the face of adversity. By the end, Daniel's courage didn't just change his own life, it transformed his school and inspired countless others. So grab a seat and get ready to be inspired by Daniel's incredible journey. This is more than just a story, it's a lesson for all of us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these empowering stories coming your way. The sky stretched endlessly above, a deep and vivid blue, unbroken except by soft, white clouds drifting lazily in the early morning light. It was as if the clouds were playfully teasing the golden rays of sunlight that danced across their edges. A gentle breeze rustled through the branches of the trees lining the roadside, creating a symphony of whispers and soft rustling leaves that harmonized with the peaceful awakening of a small town. This was Green Valley, the serene setting for the prestigious Green Valley High School, where countless lives had been shaped and where Daniel was about to begin a transformative chapter in his own. Above, sparrows flitted between the branches, chirping joyfully as if celebrating the vibrance of a new day. Their carefree melodies complemented the tranquil atmosphere, but Daniel, walking slowly down the shaded path to the school gates, felt anything but carefree. His old sneakers, though well-worn, had been polished to a gleaming finish, a small gesture that carried deep significance for him. Every deliberate step he took was laden with nervous energy and cautious hope. This was more than just his first day at a new school, it was the start of a new life, and the weight of that realization settled heavily on his young shoulders. From a distance, Daniel caught sight of the school gates, an imposing iron structure painted jet black, flanked by tall, formidable brick walls. The gates stood wide open, inviting students to step into another day of challenges, learning, and possibilities. Above the entrance, the name Green Valley High School was etched elegantly onto a bronze plaque that gleamed brightly under the morning sun. The sight was both welcoming and intimidating. Beyond the gates, a cobblestone pathway led straight through manicured lawns dotted with white stone benches and flower beds bursting with color. At the heart of the campus rose the academic buildings, their whitewashed facades radiant against the emerald green of the grass surrounding them. Daniel paused at the gates, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air in an attempt to steady his nerves. His heartbeat was a rapid drumbeat in his chest, fueled by a mix of excitement and a gnawing sense of unease. Everything will be fine, he whispered to himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced. His knuckles whitened as he clutched his bag for reassurance, as if its weight could ground him against the rising tide of uncertainty. His father's face emerged in his mind, a vision as clear and vivid as the sunlight spilling over the campus. Daniel's father, a soldier of unwavering bravery, had given his life defending their country's borders. The loss had left an indelible scar on Daniel's heart, but it also gave him a legacy of strength and resilience. His father's parting words echoed in his mind, anchoring him in this moment of vulnerability. Son, life won't always be easy, but as long as you never give up, nothing can hold you back. Daniel could still see his father as he had last remembered him, standing tall in his military uniform, a gentle smile softening the steely resolve in his eyes. That image had become Daniel's touchstone, a constant source of inspiration during moments of doubt. Today, as he stood on the threshold of an unfamiliar world, the memory of his father fortified him once again. As Daniel crossed the threshold into the school grounds, the lively chatter of students filled the air. Groups of friends gathered under the shade of trees, exchanging notes and sharing laughter. Some played catch with a basketball on the courtyard's edge, while others sat in quiet corners, engrossed in last-minute review sessions for their morning classes. The scene was lively, even chaotic, yet there was an unmistakable sense of order and purpose underpinning it all. For Daniel, however, the bustling activity only deepened his feeling of alienation. He felt like an outsider stepping into a well-oiled machine where everyone already knew their place. A group of students lounging near a bench stopped their conversation to glance in his direction, their curious eyes and hushed whispers only heightening his discomfort. A girl with blonde hair leaned over to her friend, and both giggled softly, glancing back at him. Daniel tightened his grip on his bag and kept walking, trying to appear indifferent. Ahead loomed the main school building, a modern structure with large glass windows that mirrored the sunlight. A banner stretched across the entrance bore the school's motto, excellence and integrity. The words seemed to radiate pride and ambition, yet they felt distant to Daniel, who was still searching for a sense of belonging. Pushing open the heavy glass doors, he stepped into a wide corridor lined with rows of lockers. The air inside smelled of polished wood and freshly cleaned floors, mingled with the faint scent of paper from the many bookshelves that lined the adjacent library. It was a sensory reminder of the academic rigor that awaited him. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, a candid snapshot of him and his father taken years ago. In it, they stood in a sunlit field, both laughing as if sharing a secret only they understood. The photograph was worn from being carried so often, but it was his talisman, his reminder to persevere. "Dad," Daniel thought, "I hope I can make you proud here." As he slid the photograph back into his pocket, he took another deep breath and glanced around. The hallway was beginning to fill with students hurrying to their respective classes. Daniel knew it was time to find his way, both to his classroom and in this new world that already felt so daunting. He turned toward the school map displayed on a nearby bulletin board, his eyes scanning for the room number assigned to him. His pulse quickened as he located his destination, room 10A, where his first English class awaited. English had always been his favorite subject, a solace where he could lose himself in stories and ideas far removed from his own reality. Perhaps, he thought, it could be his anchor here as well. But as he walked toward room 10A, his father's words continued to echo in his mind, urging him forward with every step. Despite the uncertainty ahead, Daniel knew one thing with absolute clarity: he would face whatever came his way with the courage and determination his father had instilled in him. This was his chance to build a life that honored the values his father had lived and died for. Beyond the imposing iron gates of Green Valley High School, the campus came alive with the vibrant energy of a new school day. The grounds were bustling with the chatter and laughter of students, echoing through the open spaces like a symphony of youthful exuberance. Groups of friends gathered under the sprawling canopies of ancient oak trees, their voices mingling as they exchanged jokes, discussed assignments, or simply enjoyed the freshness of the morning. The sight was lively and inviting, yet to Daniel it felt unfamiliar, almost like stepping into an entirely new universe. A few steps past the gates, a group of students sat casually on a bench. Their animated conversation faltered as their attention shifted to the new boy walking by. One of the girls, her golden hair catching the sunlight, leaned toward her friend, whispering something that elicited quiet giggles. Daniel could feel their eyes lingering on him, a weighty presence that seemed to follow him down the pathway. He tried to focus on his steps, pretending not to notice, but the quiet snickers felt like a persistent echo in his ears. Daniel's grip on his backpack straps tightened as he moved forward, his heart beating a little faster. It wasn't just the laughter, it was the way everything here seemed so interconnected, so full of life. Yet he felt detached from it all. This wasn't just a school, it was a microcosm of its own, and Daniel was painfully aware of how different he felt. Ahead of him, the main building rose majestically, a modern 3-story structure designed with clean lines and expansive glass windows. The morning sun bounced off the pristine glass panes, creating a dazzling effect that made the entire facade seem to glow. Above the entrance, bold banners fluttered gently in the breeze, proudly displaying the school's motto, excellence and integrity. To Daniel, the words seemed to hover between promise and challenge, a reminder of the high standards the school upheld. The atmosphere was charged with ambition, and while it was inspiring, it also carried an unspoken expectation, a pressure that made Daniel's chest tighten slightly. He paused for a moment, taking it all in. The building exuded an air of prestige, its grandeur both awe-inspiring and intimidating. As Daniel reached the large glass doors at the entrance, he caught a faint glimpse of his reflection in the mirrored surface. His own wide, apprehensive eyes stared back at him, framed by the slight slouch of his shoulders as if carrying an invisible weight. He straightened his back instinctively, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. Daniel stepped into a spacious corridor lined with lockers, the polished marble floor gleaming under the overhead lights. The subtle scent of freshly varnished wood mingled with the faint, comforting smell of paper from the library nearby, creating an aroma that was unmistakably academic. It was a sensory immersion that struck Daniel immediately. This was the world of Green Valley High, and he was now a part of it. The walls were adorned with posters and motivational quotes. One banner caught his eye: "Your future starts here." It was written in bold, capital letters, as though shouting encouragement at every student who walked past. The atmosphere was steeped in purpose, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider looking in. As more students began filling the hallway, the noise level rose. The sound of locker doors slamming shut, sneakers squeaking against the floor, and snippets of conversations blended into a chaotic yet rhythmic buzz. Daniel scanned his surroundings, his eyes darting from one corner to another, looking for the orientation board that would guide him to his first class. His heart raced slightly faster now, not from nervousness alone, but from the overwhelming energy of the place. Suddenly, the sharp ring of the school bell pierced the air, its shrill sound startling Daniel. He froze momentarily, his body tensing instinctively. The hallways erupted into motion as students hurried to their respective classes, their pace quickening as they dispersed in different directions. The brief moment of hesitation jolted Daniel into action. Realizing he couldn't afford to be late on his first day, he tightened his grip on his bag and quickened his steps. After a few turns and glances at the directional signs, Daniel found himself standing before a door marked with the bold black numbers, 10A. His heart gave a small leap. This was at the English classroom. English had always been his favorite subject, a place where he could lose himself in the pages of stories that transported him far from his own reality. It had always felt like a sanctuary, and Daniel hoped it would serve as one here too. The door was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of sunlight to stream through and light up the polished wooden floor inside. From within, he could hear the faint rustle of papers and the quiet hum of students settling into their seats. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself once more. His father's words echoed in his mind, "Son, courage isn't about being fearless, it's about facing your fears head-on." Pushing the door open gently, Daniel stepped inside. The room was bright, filled with natural light pouring in from large windows that overlooked the lush school grounds. Desks were arranged in neat rows, each paired with a matching chair. The walls were lined with bookshelves holding well-worn copies of classic novels, their spines displaying titles that hinted at stories of adventure, love, and perseverance. As Daniel made his way to an empty seat near the back of the room, he couldn't help but glance around at his new classmates. Some were busy flipping through their notebooks, while others whispered quietly to each other. A few looked up briefly, their expressions unreadable, before returning to their tasks. Daniel slid into his seat and placed his bag on the floor, trying to ignore the wave of self-consciousness that threatened to overwhelm him. As the teacher entered and the chatter subsided, Daniel let out a small sigh of relief. The familiar setting of an English classroom felt grounding, a small island of familiarity in an otherwise foreign sea. His gaze lingered on the blackboard at the front, where the teacher was beginning to write the day's lesson title, Introduction to Kill a Mockingbird. A faint smile tugged at the corners of Daniel's lips. He had read the book before and found comfort in its themes of justice and moral courage, concepts that resonated deeply with him. Perhaps, in this room, he could find a foothold, a place to belong. For now, Daniel decided to focus on what he loved most, learning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them step by step, just as his father had taught him. This was his first day, and while the path forward remained uncertain, Daniel knew he had the strength to walk it. The classroom door creaked softly as it swung open, and Daniel stepped inside. His arrival was met with an immediate wave of quiet scrutiny, a tide of gazes that washed over him, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. The room itself struck a strange balance between familiarity and foreignness. Rows of desks and chairs were neatly arranged, their uniformity broken only by the individuality of the students occupying them. A small bookshelf sat tucked in the corner, its shelves filled with well-thumbed books, while a clean whiteboard dominated the front of the room, reflecting the sunlight streaming in through tall windows. The brightness lent the space a welcoming glow, but it did little to dispel the weighty tension hanging in the air. All at once, Daniel felt like an actor stepping onto an unlit stage, every movement scrutinized by an audience hidden in the shadows. Whispers flitted around the room like faint echoes, accompanied by the subtle shuffling of feet and the rustle of papers. Some students leaned toward their neighbors, exchanging hushed words and sidelong glances. Others simply stared in silence, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and indifference. Daniel's heart raced as he tried to steady himself, his grip tightening on the straps of his backpack, as though they could anchor him against the rising tide of anxiety. At the front of the room, near the whiteboard, stood a woman whose commanding presence was unmistakable. Her chestnut brown hair was tied back neatly, her posture straight and formal. She wore a crisp blouse and a tailored skirt, her appearance exuding an air of discipline and precision. This was Ms. Brown, the English teacher, and her sharp gaze seemed to pierce through Daniel as she observed him. Her expression revealed nothing, not hostility, not warmth, just a cold, professional detachment that made Daniel's stomach churn uneasily. "Are you the new student?" As Brown asked, her voice devoid of emotion. It was measured and even, yet it lacked any trace of welcome or encouragement. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, summoning all his effort to keep his tone steady. "My name is Daniel." "Good," she said with a curt nod. "Let's hope you don't disrupt the class. Take a seat." There were no words of welcome, no reassurance to ease his nerves, just a simple, direct command. The abruptness of her tone sent a pang of discomfort through Daniel. He scanned the room quickly, his gaze landing on an empty seat near the back. Without hesitation, he moved toward it, walking briskly to avoid drawing more attention than he already had. Sliding into the chair, he ducked his head slightly, as though trying to make himself smaller, less conspicuous. Sitting at the far end of the room, Daniel exhaled softly, hoping to calm the storm of emotions churning inside him. Yet, the unease lingered. The curious eyes of his classmates, the cold indifference of Ms. Brown, and the oppressive silence that filled the room all weighed heavily on his chest. "It's just the first day," he told himself, clinging to the fragile hope that things would improve once he adjusted. "It will get better when I get to know everyone." But deep down, Daniel couldn't shake the nagging worry that he might never truly fit in. He wasn't just a new student, he carried with him a story of loss and sacrifice that set him apart. His father's death had left an indelible mark on his life, shaping him in ways that others couldn't understand. It was a source of pride for Daniel, but also a reminder of his uniqueness, an invisible scar that often made him feel like an outsider. And being different, he knew, often made people targets for judgment, ridicule, or worse. Daniel's eyes drifted to the whiteboard at the front of the room, where the day's lesson was neatly written in bold letters: "To Kill a Mockingbird." He recognized the title instantly, his heart stirring with a mix of familiarity and apprehension. It was a story he knew well, one he had read and reread because its themes resonated deeply with him. Justice, courage, and standing against prejudice, concepts that felt as though they mirrored his own struggles. Yet the irony wasn't lost on him. He couldn't have known how closely this story would intertwine with the challenges he was about to face. As Ms. Brown began the lesson, Daniel straightened his back, trying to project confidence despite the turmoil brewing within him. But his hands betrayed him, gripping the straps of his bag tightly under the desk, as though letting go would mean losing his fragile composure. Around him, the other students had shifted their attention back to their notebooks and textbooks, their curiosity about the new boy already waning. The room was filled with the sound of pens scratching against paper, yet the air still felt heavy with an unspoken tension. Not a single friendly nod, not a whispered hello, just an overwhelming silence that seemed to isolate Daniel further. He glanced at the students nearest to him. Their faces were focused, their gazes fixed downward. No one returned his fleeting looks. It was as though an invisible barrier separated him from the rest of the class, an unspoken signal that he was an outsider, at least for now. Ms. Brown's voice cut through the quiet, snapping Daniel out of his thoughts. "Today we'll continue our discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird. Can anyone summarize the key points from our last lesson?" Several hands rose hesitantly, and Ms. Brown selected a girl in the front row with neatly combed blonde hair and a soft, clear voice. The girl recited her answer with precision, repeating the main ideas with a confidence that earned her a nod of approval from the teacher. "Good," Ms. Brown said. "Now who can share their thoughts on the central theme of the book?" Daniel's pulse quickened. This was his chance, a rare opportunity to contribute, to prove that he had something valuable to offer. Gathering his courage, he raised his hand high, holding it steady above the heads of his classmates. A faint smile played on his lips as he prepared to speak, his mind already formulating the words he wanted to say. But Ms. Brown's gaze bypassed him entirely. Instead, she called on another student seated near the middle of the room. Daniel's arm faltered, and he slowly lowered it, the hopeful light in his eyes dimming into quiet disappointment. His chest tightened as the realization sank in he had been ignored. The subtle shift from eagerness to rejection was almost imperceptible, yet it left a deep ache in his chest. Daniel sat silently as the class discussion continued, his mind replaying the moment over and over. Had she not seen him, or had she chosen to overlook him deliberately? The question gnawed at him, but he kept his expression neutral, unwilling to let his emotions show. He glanced once more at the whiteboard, where the title of the book stood boldly against the stark surface: To Kill a Mockingbird. A story about standing firm in the face of injustice. Daniel felt a flicker of resolve reignite within him. His father's words echoed in his mind, a steadying force amidst his doubts, never give up. Although the morning had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, Daniel knew he couldn't let a single moment define his experience. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to walk it with the quiet courage his father had taught him. This was only the beginning. And? As the lesson continued, Daniel raised his hand once more, the gesture deliberate and firm. He held it high, hoping this time Ms. Brown would notice him. His mind was filled with the answers he wanted to share, each word carefully chosen to demonstrate his understanding of the subject. Yet, once again, her eyes seemed to pass over him as though he were invisible. Ms. Brown instead directed her questions to the students seated closer to the front, the ones she deemed reliable. Her voice was steady but unenthusiastic as she guided them through easy questions, nodding approvingly at their rehearsed, surface-level answers. For the students called upon, the process seemed routine, but for Daniel, the repeated dismissal stung deeply. A chill ran down his spine, an icy wave of realization that left him gripping the edge of his desk for stability. Does she not see me, or is she choosing not to? The question replayed in his mind, each iteration heavier with doubt. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, turning the lively classroom into a suffocating space. The sounds of pens scratching paper and chairs shifting against the floor faded into a background hum, overtaken by the thundering of his own heartbeat. The atmosphere felt deliberately orchestrated, as though every detail was designed to isolate him. Daniel couldn't shake the growing sense that he was being pushed to the margins, excluded not only by Ms. Brown but by the environment itself. Daniel wasn't alone in noticing the imbalance. A few of his classmates glanced in his direction, their expressions a mix of unease and pity. One girl sitting diagonally across from him offered a fleeting, hesitant look, her brow furrowed in something resembling sympathy before quickly turning back to her notebook. Another group near the middle exchanged whispers, their words inaudible but accompanied by faint, knowing smiles. Daniel didn't need to hear them to understand the tone of their conversation. He felt it in the subtle glances they cast his way, in the stifled chuckles that seemed to grow louder in his imagination. A tight knot formed in his stomach, a blend of embarrassment and frustration. It was as if he were a character in a play everyone else had read the script for, but no one had bothered to give him his lines. He lowered his gaze, fixing it on the notebook in front of him. The blank page stared back, its emptiness a reflection of his own growing uncertainty. What did I do wrong? He thought, his fingers tightening around his pen. Despite his resolve, the whispers and sidelong glances continued to chip away at his confidence, leaving him feeling smaller with each passing moment. The sharp, piercing sound of the bell announcing the end of the class jolted Daniel from his thoughts. It was both a relief and a release, breaking the tension that had hung over him like a storm cloud. He exhaled quietly, grateful for the chance to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the classroom. Quickly, he gathered his books and notes, moving with a quiet efficiency that betrayed his desire to leave unnoticed. As he packed his belongings, he remained acutely aware of the eyes around him, some lingering, others already turned away. A few students left the room in pairs, their conversations light and carefree, while others stayed behind, still absorbed in their notebooks. Yet no one approached him. There were no friendly smiles, no offers to walk with him to the next class. The silence around him was deafening. At the front of the room, Ms. Brown erased the whiteboard with swift, practiced strokes, her back turned to the students. She didn't acknowledge Daniel as he left. There was no glance, no word of encouragement, only the cold, mechanical act of preparing for the next group of students. Daniel caught a glimpse of his own faint reflection in the clean, empty surface of the whiteboard. His image was distorted and dim, a fleeting presence in a space that already seemed to have moved on without him. As Daniel stepped into the hallway, the hum of students hurrying to their next classes enveloped him. The corridor was alive with movement and noise, a stark contrast to the heavy silence he had endured moments before. Yet even in the bustling crowd, Daniel felt a quiet loneliness settle over him, creeping into the corners of his mind like a shadow. He paused near a row of lockers, leaning slightly against the cool metal surface. The weight of the first class, the judgmental glances, the whispers, the indifference pressed heavily on his chest. For a moment, he closed his eyes, inhaling deeply in an effort to steady himself. The air was tinged with the faint scent of cleaning products and paper, familiar but unremarkable. It grounded him, offering a small sense of normalcy amid his swirling thoughts. I can't let this break me, he thought, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The memory of his father's words surfaced, a beacon of strength amidst the doubt clouding his mind. Life won't always be easy, but you can't let it stop you. Daniel straightened his posture, forcing his shoulders back and his chin up. If he couldn't find acceptance right away, he would earn it through effort, resilience, and determination. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and began walking, blending into the flow of students heading toward their next classes. Though the knot in his chest remained, it was tempered by a growing resolve. He knew this wouldn't be an easy journey. The road ahead was bound to be filled with challenges. But Daniel had faced hardships before, and he had emerged stronger every time. This, he reminded himself, was just another test. Deep in his heart, however, he understood that the road to belonging wouldn't be a simple one. There would be more moments like this, moments where he felt unseen, unheard, and unwelcome. Yet there would also be opportunities to prove himself, to rise above the isolation and find his place. As he moved toward his next class, the hallway noise faded into the background. His focus shifted inward, where a flicker of determination had reignited. Each step he took was deliberate, carrying him closer to the person he wanted to become. Though his first class had left him feeling adrift, Daniel resolved to keep pushing forward. After all, as his father had taught him, perseverance wasn't just about enduring, it was about moving forward, even when the path seemed uncertain. This is only the beginning, he reminded himself, his steps growing steadier with each passing moment. The days that followed in Ms. Brown's English class were anything but easy for Daniel. Each lesson felt like an unending test of his patience and self-esteem. It wasn't the academic content that challenged him. Daniel had always excelled in English, his favorite subject, but the persistent coldness of Ms. Brown and the subtle way she seemed to undermine him. Despite his efforts to participate, to engage, and to demonstrate his abilities, Daniel's contributions were ignored, his questions met with disinterest, and his presence barely acknowledged. For Daniel, every interaction in that room felt like throwing stones into an abyss, his efforts swallowed by the icy atmosphere Ms. Brown deliberately maintained. Her indifference was more than a professional oversight, it was a deliberate chill, an unspoken signal that she had no interest in what Daniel had to offer. And yet, he kept trying, holding on to the faint hope that his determination might one day pierce the cold silence. Room 10 was beautiful in its design, a space filled with natural light that flooded in through tall windows every morning. The sunlight illuminated the spotless whiteboard, casting soft reflections on the polished tiled floor. To any observer, it was an ideal learning environment, warm and inspiring. But to Daniel, the room often felt like a prison, an invisible cage built not from walls or windows, but from the oppressive atmosphere Ms. Brown cultivated. It wasn't just her sharp tone or detached demeanor, it was the way she dominated the room, her presence heavy and commanding. The students mirrored her energy, their behavior subdued, their conversations cautious. There was little laughter, no chatter that wasn't directly tied to the lesson. Ms. Brown's expectations seemed to hover in the air like a cloud, stifling and inescapable. One Monday morning, the usual routine unfolded as Ms. Brown entered the classroom. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor with precision, each step echoing like a drumbeat. She carried herself with an air of authority that demanded silence. The classroom grew still as she reached her desk, placing her leather bag neatly on its surface. "Today we will discuss the metaphors in To Kill a Mockingbird," she announced, her tone measured but devoid of warmth. The title of the book, prominently displayed on the whiteboard, caught the morning sunlight, the words stark and bold against the gleaming surface. Daniel sat in his usual seat at the back of the room, his notebook open and pen poised. This novel had always been special to him. Its themes of justice, courage, and the fight against prejudice resonated deeply, mirroring much of his own journey. He felt a kinship with its characters, a connection to their struggles and triumphs. As Ms. Brown began her lecture, Daniel focused intently, jotting down notes with meticulous care. The room buzzed faintly with the quiet rustle of pages and the scratch of pens against paper. The other students seemed absorbed in their own tasks, but for Daniel, the atmosphere was fraught with tension. Ms. Brown's indifference was a constant shadow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that every effort he made was being silently dismissed. As Ms. Brown posed questions to the class, Daniel's mind raced with answers. He thought of the passages he had read the night before, the connections he had drawn between the metaphors and the broader themes of the novel. His hand twitched as he fought the urge to raise it. He had tried before many times, and each attempt had ended with Ms. Brown choosing another student, her gaze never settling on him. Still, he couldn't suppress the hope that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. With a quiet resolve, Daniel lifted his hand. The movement felt both daring and futile, but he held it steady, his fingers stretching toward the ceiling. The moment stretched on, but Ms. Brown's eyes passed over him without pause. She chose a girl seated near the front, who offered a hesitant, textbook-perfect response. Ms. Brown nodded approvingly, her lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile. Daniel's hand dropped slowly to his desk, the weight of rejection settling over him. The sting of being overlooked was sharp, but what hurt more was the deliberate nature of it. He clenched his pen tightly, his knuckles turning white, as he fought the wave of frustration rising within him. From his seat, Daniel could see the other students casting quick glances in his direction. Some looked puzzled, others uncomfortable, as if they, too, noticed the pattern but were unsure of what to make of it. A few leaned toward their neighbors, whispering quietly. Though he couldn't hear their words, Daniel could feel their implications like a low hum in the air. Were they mocking him? Pitying him? Either possibility left him feeling raw and exposed. Despite the unspoken judgment swirling around him, Daniel forced himself to focus on the lesson. He flipped to a fresh page in his notebook, writing down his thoughts with renewed determination. If he couldn't share his ideas aloud, he would capture them here, building his confidence in the privacy of his own words. This isn't the end, he told himself, the mantra a small but steadying force in the storm of doubt. As Ms. Brown's lecture continued, Daniel found himself retreating into the text of To Kill a Mockingbird. The characters and their struggles felt like old friends, their resilience a source of quiet inspiration. He thought of Atticus Finch standing firm in the face of injustice, of Scout's journey toward understanding and empathy. These moments reminded him that even in a world full of prejudice and indifference, there was room for courage and growth. He glanced out the window, where the morning sunlight spilled across the school lawn. For a brief moment, the warmth of the scene outside soothed him, a reminder that there was a world beyond the confines of room 10A, a world where his voice could be heard and his efforts recognized. When the lesson ended and Ms. Brown dismissed the class, Daniel gathered his belongings with practiced efficiency. He avoided the gazes of his classmates, their whispered conversations following him as he left the room. The corridor outside was alive with movement, students hurrying to their next destinations, but Daniel walked at his own pace, his thoughts far from the bustle around him. Though his heart felt heavy with the weight of another difficult day, a spark of determination remained. This won't define me, he thought, tightening his grip on his books. His father's words echoed in his mind, a steady reminder of the strength he carried within him. Never give up, son. Keep moving forward. As Daniel made his way toward his next class, the sunlight streaming through the corridor windows seemed brighter, more welcoming. It wasn't an easy path he was walking, but it was one he would continue to face head-on, step by step. The classroom was silent except for the faint rustle of pages as students turned to the passage Ms. Brown had assigned. Daniel's turn had arrived. Rising from his seat, he adjusted his book, the well-worn pages marked with sticky notes and penciled annotations. His heart beat steadily, a rhythm of both nervous anticipation and determination. Clearing his throat, Daniel began to read. His voice, though calm, carried a quiet strength. Each word was pronounced with clarity, reflecting his understanding and thoughtfulness. After finishing the excerpt, he looked up, his eyes meeting Ms. Brown's with a mix of confidence and vulnerability. I think this passage highlights how injustice doesn't only harm the direct victim, but also shakes the faith of everyone who witnesses it, he said, his tone firm but reflective. It shows that... Before he could finish, Miss Brown interrupted. Her tone was clipped, her expression neutral but with an edge of condescension. Daniel, are you certain you understand the author's intent? It sounds like you're projecting your personal opinions onto the text. A hush fell over the room. Several students turned to look at Daniel, their faces painted with a mix of curiosity and unease. He felt a rush of heat creep up his neck and onto his face, but he refused to let the embarrassment consume him. Drawing a steady breath, he responded, carefully. Mrs. Brown, he began, his voice softer but still composed. I believe this story also speaks to broader issues, not just within narrative but in real life. It's about how... Mrs. Brown's raised eyebrow and icy stare cut him off again. Daniel, you'd do better to focus on the text itself rather than trying to overcomplicate things. Take your seat. The finality in her words left no room for argument. Daniel lowered himself back into his chair, his hands gripping the edges of his desk as if to anchor himself. He stared down at his notebook, the carefully written notes now blurred as his vision grew misty. But he blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. The sting of humiliation was sharp, but he swallowed it, forcing himself to maintain composure. Daniel hoped the incident would end with that class, that perhaps Miss Brown would let it pass without further remark. But it didn't stop there. Over the following days, her criticisms became a regular occurrence, each one delivered with the same cold precision. One day, Miss Brown assigned the class a written analysis of the central themes in To Kill a Mockingbird. Daniel approached the task with care, spending the entire evening crafting his essay. He chose his words meticulously, building his argument with clear logic and heartfelt reflection. When he finished, he felt a quiet pride, a small sense of accomplishment that reminded him of his love for literature. On the day she returned their essays, Miss Brown distributed the papers with her usual brisk efficiency. When she handed Daniel his, she paused, her gaze sharp and unkind. "The content of your essay is adequate," she remarked, her voice loud enough for the nearby students to hear. "But your handwriting is nearly illegible. I'm surprised you managed to get into this school with writing like that." A ripple of laughter emerged from the back of the classroom. The sound, though muffled, was piercing. Daniel froze, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The pride he had felt the night before crumbled instantly under the weight of her words. He kept his eyes on the desk, his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his composure. After class, Daniel lingered in his seat, pretending to organize his notes as the other students filed out. He needed a moment to breathe, to collect himself before facing the crowded hallways. His essay lay before him, marked with Miss Brown's red ink. Though her comments were sparse, each one felt like a jab, unclear argument, avoid overcomplicating, and, in bold at the bottom, handwriting must improve. The classroom was empty now, save for Miss Brown, who stood at the whiteboard erasing the lesson's remnants. Daniel glanced at her reflection in the board's surface, her movements precise and indifferent. She showed no sign of regret or second thought about her words. Walking into the hallway, Daniel felt as though a heavy cloud hung over him. The usual chatter and movement of students felt distant, almost muted, as he navigated the sea of backpacks and hurried footsteps. His mind replayed the laughter, the sharp tone of Miss Brown's voice, and the way her words had sliced through his confidence like a blade. He clenched his hands into fists, the essay still crumpled in one. His father's voice echoed faintly in his mind, a comforting reminder. Life isn't about avoiding hardships, son. It's about how you face them. Daniel stopped at a quiet corner near the library, leaning against the cool brick wall. He unfolded the essay, smoothing the creases carefully. Despite the harsh criticism scrawled across the page, he read through his own words again. Beneath the doubt Ms. Brown had planted, he found traces of the passion and clarity he had poured into the essay. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. "I can't let this define me," he thought, inhaling deeply. The air smelled faintly of books and chalk, grounding him in the familiarity of the school. "I'll write better. I'll speak better. I'll show her." In the days that followed, Daniel poured his energy into his studies, refusing to let Miss Brown's words overshadow his love for learning. He stayed late in the library, seeking out additional books on literary analysis. He practiced his handwriting, filling pages with careful letters and neatly structured sentences. Each time he faced Miss Brown's icy gaze, he reminded himself that he wasn't doing this to win her approval. He was doing it for himself, for the boy who loved stories and believed in their power to illuminate the world. But deep inside, a quiet question lingered. Would she ever see him for who he truly was? It was a day like any other in room 10A, the usual sunlight spilling through the tall windows and casting warm patches on the polished floor. But for Daniel, the warmth of the room often felt at odds with the coldness he endured within it. He sat at the back of the class, his pen moving steadily across the pages of his notebook as he jotted down notes from Ms. Brown's lecture. Her voice carried the same even, detached tone, filling the air like the ticking of a clock, steady, emotionless, relentless. Then, without warning, the clockwork rhythm of her words stopped. She turned abruptly, her sharp gaze locking onto Daniel. Daniel, she said, her tone slicing through the quiet hum of the class, are you chewing gum in my class? The question hit Daniel like a slap. He looked up, startled, his pen pausing mid-stroke. No, Ms. Brown, he said quickly, his voice calm but edged with confusion. I'm not chewing gum. Mrs. Brown's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression hardening. Don't lie to me, Daniel. I can see it. I'm not, he insisted, his voice wavering slightly as he glanced around at the other students. Their faces were unreadable, a mix of quiet curiosity and unease. Mrs. Brown shook her head, dismissing his defense entirely. If you refuse to follow the rules, I'll have no choice but to call your parents in for a meeting. The classroom fell silent. The only sounds were the faint rustling of paper and the soft creak of chairs as a few students shifted uncomfortably. Daniel felt the weight of every eye in the room turned to him, but no one spoke. No one came to his defense. Leave the room, Daniel, Miss Brown ordered, her voice cold and final. Daniel rose slowly, his legs stiff, as though weighed down by the invisible burden of the accusation. His notebook lay open on the desk, his pen resting neatly on top, a small symbol of the effort and focus he had brought to the lesson. Effort that now felt meaningless. Without a word, he made his way to the door. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the silence as he walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Once outside, Daniel leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, his breathing shallow. He stared out the window opposite him, the clear blue sky stretching endlessly above the treetops. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that should have felt full of possibilities, but for Daniel, the sky seemed distant, obscured by a heavy gray cloud that no one else could see. What did I do wrong? He murmured to himself, his voice barely audible in the empty corridor. He replayed the scene in his mind, searching for the reason behind Miss Brown's accusation. There was nothing. No gum, no distraction, no infraction of the rules. The unfairness of it stung, and the humiliation lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Each time Miss Brown criticized him, Daniel felt as though a small piece of himself was being chipped away. Her words weren't just corrections or reprimands. They were sharp, deliberate strikes aimed at his sense of self. He couldn't understand why she seemed to single him out, why her gaze was always colder when it fell on him, why her tone always harsher. Is it because I'm different? He wondered, his eyes fixed on the tree branches swaying gently in the breeze outside. Because I'm not like the other students? The question gnawed at him. In many ways, he was different. He wasn't as outgoing as some of his classmates. He didn't laugh as loudly or join in on their carefree chatter. And then there was the shadow of his past, the loss of his father, the quiet strength he carried in the face of that grief. Did these things set him apart in ways that made him a target? Daniel tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack, the familiar texture of the worn fabric grounding him. I'd done nothing wrong, he reminded himself. But even as he repeated the words, they felt fragile, like a glass wall that could shatter with one more blow. Each day in Miss Brown's class became a new trial, a fresh test of Daniel's resilience. The air in room 10A was stifling, not because of the walls or the heat, but because of the unspoken tension that seemed to linger around him. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, felt scrutinized, as though the slightest misstep would invite another pointed remark from Miss Brown. He learned to keep his head down, to speak only when spoken to. He buried himself in his work, pouring his energy into every assignment, in the hope that his efforts might finally be recognized, but no matter how much he tried, it was never enough. Each time she returned his essays, her comments stung like paper cuts. Overcomplicated, unclear, focus on the basics. Her words clung to him, echoing in the back of his mind long after the class had ended. He carried them with him through the hallways, into the lunchroom, even home at night, when he sat at his desk, staring at the blank page of his notebook. Despite everything, Daniel refused to give up. Beneath the weight of Miss Brown's criticisms and the whispers of his classmates, a quiet flame of determination continued to burn. He thought of his father, of the lessons he had taught him before he passed. Life won't always be fair, Daniel, but you have to stand tall. You have to keep going no matter what. Daniel straightened his back, his gaze hardening as he looked out at the sky once more. The gray cloud in his mind began to lift, just slightly, revealing a glimpse of blue beyond. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He would face more days like this one, more moments of unfairness and isolation. But he also knew that he had the strength to endure. "I won't let her break me," he thought, his hands tightening into fists. "I'll prove that I belong here, not to her, but to myself." With that resolve, Daniel pushed himself off the wall and walked back toward the classroom door. The weight in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter now, tempered by the determination to rise above the challenges before him. The fight wasn't over, but Daniel was ready to face it. The impact of Miss Brown's behavior wasn't limited to Daniel alone. The ripple effect began to touch others in the classroom. A few of his classmates had started to notice the subtle yet persistent unfairness, the way Miss Brown's gaze lingered coldly on Daniel, her criticisms sharper and her tone harsher when directed at him. Whispers of unease occasionally passed between students, but no one dared to confront the teacher or speak up in Daniel's defense. To Daniel, it felt as though he were standing alone in the eye of a storm. The winds of injustice roared around him, threatening to tear away his confidence and sense of self. Yet even in the face of this tempest, Daniel clung to his resolve. He reminded himself of the values his father had instilled in him: justice, integrity, and perseverance. His father, who had sacrificed his life to protect these very principles, had left behind more than memories. He had given Daniel a legacy, one that demanded strength and resilience in the face of adversity. At lunchtime, Daniel sat quietly in the far corner of the school cafeteria, his back against the wall. In his hands was the lunchbox his mother had prepared early that morning, the carefully packed meal, a small, tangible reminder of her unwavering support. Yet even the comforting familiarity of home felt distant here. The cafeteria buzzed with life. Students gathered in tight-knit groups at the long, neatly arranged tables, their laughter and conversations filling the air. The cheerful hum of camaraderie created an almost festive atmosphere, a stark contrast to the heaviness Daniel carried within him. He watched as friends shared inside jokes, traded snacks, and planned their afternoons with carefully ease. It was a world of connection and belonging, one that seemed to exist just out of his reach. Daniel's eyes swept over the room, taking in the colorful posters that lined the walls. Bold, bright letters proclaimed messages like "Be kind" and "Everyone belongs." Their vibrant optimism seemed almost mocking. How could he feel included in a community where he faced cold stares, whispered judgments, and blatant disregard from his own teacher? The words, intended to inspire, felt hollow, reminders of a reality that didn't align with his experience. He picked at his food, his appetite dulled by the weight in his chest. The storm inside him raged quietly, a mix of frustration, sadness, and defiance. "Why me?" he wondered for the 1,000th time, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns etched into the table. "What have I done to deserve this?" Daniel's thoughts spiraled as he tried to make sense of his situation. He remembered the days when he was younger, when school felt like a safe haven, a place where curiosity and effort were enough to earn respect. But here, in this new school, the rules seemed different. Effort wasn't enough. Being kind wasn't enough. Even his love for learning, something that had always brought him solace, seemed to be overshadowed by Ms. Brown's relentless scrutiny. Yet even as these thoughts weighed on him, a small, steady voice within pushed back against the despair. "This isn't the end," it whispered. "You're stronger than this." Daniel thought of his father again. He could almost hear the calm, steady tone of his voice. Courage isn't the absence of fear, son. It's doing what's right, even when it feels impossible. The memory gave him strength, a reminder that his battle wasn't just for himself. It was for the values his father had lived and died for, the principles Daniel wanted to carry forward. He straightened his back slightly, gripping the edges of his lunchbox as if drawing strength from its solidity. Around him, the room continued to hum with life. Two boys at a nearby table leaned in close, their laughter loud and uninhibited as they showed each other memes on their phones. A group of girls farther down the room was practicing a cheer routine, their synchronized movements drawing cheers and claps from their friends. Even the cafeteria staff seemed to move with an ease that Daniel envied, their cheerful banter adding to the room's lively energy. Yet Daniel felt as though he were watching it all through a pane of glass, close enough to see, but too far to touch. The more he observed, the more acutely he felt his own isolation. The storm in his mind swirled again, and for a brief moment, he let himself sink into the weight of it. Maybe this is how it will always be, he thought, the bitterness of the idea cutting through him like a knife. Maybe I'll never really belong here. But as quickly as the thought surfaced, he pushed it away. He couldn't let himself spiral into hopelessness. Belonging, he realized, wasn't something that could always be given. Sometimes it had to be earned, fought for. And if Mrs. Brown's coldness and the indifference of his classmates were obstacles, they were ones he could overcome. Daniel let out a slow breath, his gaze shifting back to the lunchbox in his hands. He thought about the care his mother put into preparing his meals, the quiet moments when she would remind him of his strength without saying a word. Her belief in him was a foundation he could stand on, even when the world around him felt unstable. This isn't over, he told himself, his voice firm despite the ache in his chest. He didn't know how long it would take, but he was determined to prove, to himself and to those around him, that he belonged. Not because he wanted their approval, but because he believed in his own worth. The lunchroom grew louder as students began finishing their meals, the clatter of trays and chatter of voices rising in volume. Daniel stood up, carefully placing his lunchbox into his bag. He glanced around the room one last time, his eyes lingering on the posters with their bright slogans. For the first time, they didn't feel entirely empty. Maybe, he thought, those words can mean something, someday. As Daniel stepped out of the cafeteria and into the sunlight, the warmth on his skin felt like a small reassurance. The storm in his mind hadn't disappeared, but it had calmed, its winds no longer howling quite so fiercely. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and began walking toward his next class, each step deliberate, each movement carrying the quiet strength of someone who refused to be broken. In the distance, the school bell rang, its clear tone cutting through the air. For Daniel, it wasn't just a signal to move on to the next lesson. It was a reminder that every challenge he faced was another step in his journey, a journey he was determined to walk with courage and integrity, no matter how difficult the path might be. After days of enduring Ms. Brown's unfair treatment, Daniel realized he could no longer remain silent. The weight of the injustice was too heavy to bear alone, and he recalled his father's wise words. When you feel like you can't face something on your own, seek help from those you trust. It's not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. With those words in mind, Daniel resolved to share his struggles. During the lunch break, he found himself standing outside the principal's office. The wooden door bore a simple brass plaque engraved with the name Principal Jamie, a man known for his fairness and compassion. Taking a deep breath, Daniel raised his hand and knocked. The muffled sound seemed to echo louder in his mind, amplifying his nervousness. "Come in," a calm voice called from within. The office was spacious yet inviting, with an air of quiet authority. A large oak desk sat at the center, its polished surface neatly organized with files, a lamp, and a small potted plant. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and binders whose glossy spines reflected the warm glow of the overhead light. Behind the desk, a wall of glass offered a view of the school's garden, The midday sunlight poured through, illuminating vibrant flowers in shades of red, yellow, and purple. Their gentle swaying in the breeze created a peaceful contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within Daniel. Principal Jamie, a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a calm demeanor, looked up from his paperwork. His kind eyes softened as he saw Daniel standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Daniel," he said warmly, gesturing for him to enter. "Come in. What can I do for you?" Daniel stepped inside, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack like a lifeline. His throat felt tight. The words he had rehearsed now caught somewhere between his mind and his voice. But as Principal Jamie offered him a reassuring smile and motioned for him to sit, Daniel felt a flicker of courage. Sitting on the edge of the chair, Daniel took a deep breath and began. Slowly, hesitantly at first, he recounted the events that had unfolded in Ms. Brown's English class. He described how she consistently ignored him when he raised his hand, how her critiques were harsher than necessary, and how she seemed to single him out with accusations that felt baseless. When he reached the incident where Ms. Brown had accused him of chewing gum, Daniel's voice faltered. His hands clenched his knees tightly, his knuckles whitening as he tried to suppress the anger and humiliation that bubbled to the surface. Principal Jamie leaned forward slightly, his brows knitting together in a thoughtful frown. He listened intently, not interrupting once. His expression was one of both concern and quiet contemplation, and his silence created a safe space for Daniel to continue. When Daniel finally finished, he sat back, exhaling deeply as though he had been holding his breath throughout the recounting. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves outside the glass window. Principal Jamie broke the silence with a gentle but direct question. "Daniel, how do you feel? Having to face this every day?" Daniel lowered his gaze, his voice soft but charged with emotion. "I feel like I don't belong here, sir. I keep trying to prove myself, but it feels like no one cares. I'm tired, and I feel alone." The principal nodded slowly, his expression serious, yet empathetic. "Daniel," he began, his voice steady, "what you're feeling is completely valid. No one should have to endure what you've been going through. Your father sacrificed his life to protect justice and fairness, and I can see that same strength in you. Coming here to speak up wasn't easy, but it shows incredible courage." His words struck a chord in Daniel. For weeks, he had carried the weight of Ms. Brown's actions alone, unsure if anyone would listen or care. Now, hearing Principal Jamie's acknowledgement of his pain felt like a balm on a raw wound. It wasn't just the promise of action, it was the recognition of his struggle that made the difference. "I want you to know," Principal Jamie continued, his tone firm but kind, "that I take this very seriously. I will address this matter directly and ensure that it is resolved. You deserve to feel supported and respected here, Daniel, and I'm proud of you for trusting me enough to share this." As Principal Jamie's words sank in, Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was as though the heavy burden he had been carrying for so long had been lifted, even if just slightly. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to hope that things could change. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It means a lot to me." Principal Jamie stood, extending a hand toward Daniel. "You're not alone in this," he said. "Remember that. And if you ever feel this way again, my door is always open." Daniel shook his hand, the firm grip a silent exchange of trust. As he left the office, the sunlight streaming through the glass seemed brighter, the colors of the garden more vivid. The storm in his heart hadn't disappeared entirely, but the clouds had parted just enough to let in a ray of light. Walking back toward the cafeteria, Daniel's steps felt lighter. He knew that the road ahead might still hold challenges, but he also knew he wasn't facing them alone. His father's words echoed in his mind once more. When you seek help, it's not weakness, it's strength. For the first time, Daniel felt like he was beginning to take control of his narrative. He didn't need to carry the weight of injustice by himself anymore. With Principal Jamie's support and his own resilience, he believed he could find a way to not just survive, but thrive, even in the face of adversity. The next morning, the sound of Principal Jamie's polished shoes echoed down the hallway leading to room 10A. Students loitering near their lockers instinctively stepped aside, their curious gazes following the imposing figure. Principal Jamie's tall stature and calm authority commanded respect. His expression was resolute, his stride purposeful. When he entered the classroom, a heavy silence fell over the room. Miss Brown, who had been writing on the whiteboard, turned to face him. Her expression flickered with surprise, but quickly settled into practiced composure. "Good morning, Principal Jamie," she greeted him, her tone calm, though a faint edge betrayed her unease. "Is there something I can help you with?" Principal Jamie nodded, his demeanor polite but firm. "Miss Brown, I need to speak with you privately. Would you step outside, please?" The atmosphere in the classroom shifted immediately. The tension was palpable. Even the softest breaths seemed amplified in the charged silence. The students exchanged wide-eyed glances, their pencils and books momentarily forgotten. In the back of the room, Daniel's heart raced. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, a mix of hope and apprehension swelling within him. "This is it," he thought. "This is where the truth comes out." Mrs. Brown followed Principal Jamie down the corridor to his office, her footsteps hesitant compared to his deliberate stride. Inside, the room was illuminated by warm, golden light streaming through the large window behind Principal Jamie's desk. The window offered a view of the school's garden, where flowers bloomed in vibrant colors under the gentle morning sun. But the serene scene outside was starkly at odds with the heavy tension inside the office. Principal Jamie gestured for Ms. Brown to take a seat. She sat stiffly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while he settled into the chair across from her. The polished oak desk between them seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. "Miss Brown," Principal Jamie began, his voice calm but cutting, "I've received a complaint from one of your students, Daniel. He alleges that you've treated him unfairly in your class. I want to hear your perspective on this." Ms. Brown blinked, momentarily caught off guard, but quickly recovered her composure. "Principal Jamie," she said smoothly, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel is a student who struggles to fit in. I've only been trying to help him adapt to the academic environment here." Principal Jamie leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together on the desk. His eyes bore into hers, unflinching. "Help him? By ignoring him when he raises his hand? By accusing him of actions he didn't commit? By consistently undermining his efforts in front of his peers?" Each question landed like a hammer, deliberate and unrelenting. Mrs. Brown faltered, her confident facade beginning to crack. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her gaze darting toward the window before returning to meet his. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. I only wanted to push him to improve." Principal Jamie's posture straightened, his expression hardening. Pushing a student to improve does not justify humiliating them or singling them out unfairly. Do you understand that, Miss Brown? The room fell silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves outside the window. Miss Brown's hands tightened around the edge of her chair as she looked down, unable to meet his gaze. For the first time, she seemed genuinely unsettled. "Miss Brown," Principal Jamie continued, his tone softening slightly but retaining its authority. "Daniel's father gave his life in service to this country. That boy has faced more challenges than most of his peers, and he has shown remarkable strength in coming forward about this. He deserves the same respect and opportunities as every other student in this school." Mr. Brown's face flushed. The weight of his words seemed to sink in, though she remained silent. Principal Jamie sighed, a trace of disappointment flickering across his face. "I cannot allow this to continue. Effective immediately, you will step back from teaching while we review your behavior in this matter. I hope you use this time to reflect on your actions and the impact they have had." Ms. Brown nodded stiffly, her voice barely audible as she murmured, "I understand." After Ms. Brown left the office, Principal Jamie called Daniel in. The boy entered hesitantly, his small frame dwarfed by the room's grand furnishings. His eyes darted briefly to the window, where the flowers swayed gently in the breeze, before settling on Principal Jamie's kind but serious expression. "Daniel," Principal Jamie said, rising from his seat and walking around the desk to place a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "I want you to know how proud I am of you. Speaking up against injustice takes great courage, and you've shown incredible strength." Daniel swallowed hard, the lump in his throat threatening to overwhelm him. For weeks he had felt invisible, dismissed, and isolated, but in this moment he felt seen, heard, and validated. "I have spoken with Miss Brown," Principal Jamie continued. "She won't be teaching your class for the time being. I promise you, Daniel, we will ensure that you and every student here are treated with the respect and fairness you deserve." Tears pricked at the corners of Daniel's eyes, but he blinked them away, nodding slowly. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Principal Jamie offered him a small but genuine smile. "You're not alone in this. If you ever feel like you're facing a challenge you can't handle, my door is always open. Don't forget that." As Daniel left the office, the sunlight outside felt warmer, the air fresher. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest had lifted. Walking through the school's corridors, he noticed the curious gazes of his classmates, but they didn't bother him anymore. He held his head high, each step more confident than the last. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges to face, and he would still have to work hard to prove himself. But now, he also knew that he had allies, people who believed in him and were willing to stand by him. In his heart, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a steady reminder of the values he carried forward. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And Daniel had done just that. The bell signaling the start of class echoed through the hallways, casting a calm hush over the bustling school. Room 10A, once steeped in tension under Miss Brown's watch, now felt lighter, almost unrecognizable. Her stern, cold presence had been replaced by Miss Johnson, a young and warm-hearted teacher with a kind smile and an open demeanor. The atmosphere in the room had shifted noticeably. Students, once wary and rigid, now seemed more relaxed. There was a quiet buzz of conversation as Miss Johnson greeted the class with cheerful energy, her enthusiasm contagious. But for Daniel, a lingering sense of unfamiliarity remained. Though the oppressive weight of Miss Brown's presence was gone, the scars of her treatment hadn't fully healed. Seated at his usual spot near the back of the room, Daniel glanced at his classmates. There was something different in the way they looked at him now. The harsh, judgmental stares that had once pierced him were softer, tinged with a faint trace of understanding. He caught a few fleeting glances that quickly turned into faint, supportive smiles. It wasn't much, but it felt significant, a sign that the invisible wall separating him from the rest of the class was beginning to crack. At lunchtime, Daniel stepped out into the sprawling campus of Green Valley High. The sky was a vibrant shade of blue, its expanse unbroken save for the occasional drifting cloud. Rays of golden sunlight filtered through the towering branches of ancient trees, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the lush green grass below. The school grounds were alive with activity. Groups of students gathered on benches, sharing stories and laughter. Others sprawled across the open lawns, tossing frisbees or chatting over packed lunches. The carefree energy of his peers was palpable, their voices blending into a harmonious symphony of life. But for Daniel, this bustling world still felt just out of reach, a vibrant painting he could admire but not yet step into. He made his way to a quiet spot beneath a massive maple tree near the school's entrance. The tree's fiery red leaves glowed under the afternoon sun, a few drifting lazily to the ground with each gentle breeze. Daniel sat on an old stone bench beneath its shade, watching as the leaves collected in delicate piles around him. their vivid hues standing out against the gray of the weathered stone. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint earthy scent of fallen leaves and freshly cut grass. For a moment, the beauty of the scene lulled his mind into a rare sense of calm. But as he stared at the scattered leaves, his thoughts began to drift back to the confrontation between Principal Jamie and Ms. Brown. The memory of that day played in his mind like a film on loop. He could still hear the sharp clarity of Principal Jamie's voice, the firmness in his tone as he defended Daniel's right to be treated fairly. It was a pivotal moment, one that had shifted the course of his experience at Green Valley. Yet, despite the vindication, doubt lingered. Did Ms. Brown's suspension truly solve the problem, he wondered? While some of his classmates had started to warm to him, Daniel knew that change wouldn't come overnight. The subtle judgments, the whispered gossip, those things wouldn't vanish with the removal of one teacher. And deep down, he feared that he would always carry the shadow of being different. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, a spark of hope glimmered. Daniel had seen firsthand that speaking out could create change, even in the smallest of ways. He thought of his father's unwavering belief in justice, the principles he had fought and died for. This is only the beginning, Daniel reminded himself, his resolve hardening. I'll keep moving forward. A few days later, as Daniel wandered to the campus during a free period, a bright poster on the main bulletin board caught his eye. Multicultural Club Rare Colors Meet. Join us for our first meeting this Friday. The announcement was part of Principal Jamie's effort to foster inclusivity and connection among the students. It was a bold initiative aimed at creating a space where everyone could feel valued and accepted. Daniel stared at the poster for a long moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. He felt a pull toward the idea, but hesitated. Would I even fit in there, he wondered? After a moment of deliberation, he decided to take a chance. The club meeting was held in a bright, airy room on the second floor of the main building. Large windows framed a view of the school's rear garden, where sunlight danced on the petals of blooming flowers. The room itself was cozy, with chairs arranged in a circle to encourage conversation. A small table in the corner held snacks and drinks, adding a casual, welcoming touch. When Daniel stepped inside, he felt a wave of nervousness. Only a handful of students were present, scattered across the room. Their faces were unfamiliar, and Daniel hesitated near the doorway, unsure where to sit. Then, a cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. "Daniel, you're here." He turned to see Sarah, a girl from his English class, waving enthusiastically. Her warm smile and easy manner took him by surprise. "Hi, Sarah," he said, his voice shy but steady as he walked toward her. "I'm so glad you came," she said brightly, motioning to the seat next to hers. "This club is amazing. I think you'll really like it." Daniel nodded, his tension easing slightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was happy to see him, without judgment, without expectation. He took the seat, listening as the other students began introducing themselves. Each shared a bit about their background, their passions, and what had drawn them to the club. When it was Daniel's turn, he hesitated. The room was quiet, every face turned toward him with genuine curiosity. Slowly, he began to speak. He shared a little about his love for reading, his experiences as a new student, and the challenges he'd faced. Though he held back the deeper pain of his father's loss, the simple act of opening up felt liberating. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like an outsider. As the meeting continued, Daniel found himself relaxing. The conversations were lively and genuine, filled with laughter and understanding. The students came from different walks of life, but their differences only added richness to the discussion. For Daniel, it was a revelation. A space where he didn't need to try so hard to prove himself, where he was welcomed simply for being himself. By the end of the meeting, he felt lighter, his heart warmed by the connections he had started to build. As he walked home that evening, the fading sunlight painted the campus in hues of gold and amber. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a sense of belonging, not just in the club, but within himself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Daniel knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking it alone anymore. The presence of Miss Johnson in the English classroom brought a breath of fresh air. Unlike her predecessor, she exuded warmth and positivity, creating an environment where students felt encouraged and respected. Miss Johnson wasn't just a skilled teacher, she was also deeply perceptive, always sensitive to the needs of her students. Her ability to engage the class was evident from the way she treated every contribution with genuine interest and a smile that made even the shyest students feel valued. For Daniel, Miss Johnson's approach was transformative. No longer did he dread raising his hand or sharing his thoughts. One day, as the class discussed the theme of injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird, Daniel felt a surge of confidence as he voiced his perspective. "I think injustice doesn't just exist in the legal system," he began, his voice steady. "It creeps into everyday actions, often unnoticed. Sometimes, our words or actions hurt others in ways we don't realize." The room fell silent as his classmates absorbed his words. For a moment, Daniel's heart raced, unsure of how his insight would be received. But then, to his surprise, a few students nodded in agreement. Sarah, the girl who had been warming to him over the past weeks, even built on his point. "That's so true," she added. "Like how small biases can snowball into bigger problems if we don't address them." The discussion flowed naturally from there, with other students chiming in, and Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: warmth, belonging, and respect. His chest swelled with a quiet pride, and for the first time, he realized his voice mattered. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed shifts not only in how others treated him, but also within himself. The echoes of isolation and self-doubt began to fade, replaced by a budding sense of confidence. Encouragement from Principal Jamie, Miss Johnson's unwavering support, and the growing camaraderie with his classmates fueled this transformation. For the first time, Daniel began to see himself as more than just an outsider. He no longer lingered at the edges of social groups or avoided eye contact in the hallways. Instead, he sought opportunities to connect with others. He joined after-school activities, attended group study sessions, and allowed himself to trust the people around him. This openness brought unexpected joys. During a group project for history class, Daniel and his team found themselves laughing over shared jokes as they worked late in the library. During lunch, he discovered a knack for storytelling, captivating his small circle of friends with tales from his childhood. Slowly but surely, Daniel was building relationships that felt genuine and reciprocal. More importantly, he began to understand the power of standing up, not just for himself but for others. He realized that his willingness to confront injustice had created a ripple effect, inspiring his classmates to be kinder, more thoughtful, and more inclusive. One crisp morning, Daniel was called to Principal Jamie's office. As he made his way there, the familiar path through the school felt different. The trepidation he once associated with those hallways had been replaced with a quiet confidence. By now, the principal's office, with its warm golden light and view of the vibrant school garden, had become a place of reassurance rather than anxiety. "Come in, Daniel," Principal Jamie said warmly, motioning for him to take a seat. The principal's desk was as meticulously organized as ever, a reflection of his thoughtful nature. Daniel sat, his curiosity piqued as Principal Jamie leaned forward, his expression both serious and kind. "Daniel," he began, "I want to tell you how proud I am of you. What you've done, speaking up against injustice, persevering through challenges, and inspiring those around you, is no small feat. It's something many adults would struggle with, let alone a student." Daniel felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest as he listened. He wasn't sure what to say, so he simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the principal's steady eyes. Principal Jamie continued, his tone growing even more heartfelt. As a token of the school's recognition of your courage and resilience, I'm pleased to inform you that we've decided to sponsor your tuition in full until you graduate." For a moment, Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. His eyes widened and his breath hitched as the weight of the words sank in. "You mean, my tuition?" he stammered. Principal Jamie smiled gently. "Yes, Daniel, you've earned this, and I have no doubt you'll continue to achieve great things." Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears, not of sorrow or frustration, but of overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what else to say." Principal Jamie stood and placed a firm but comforting hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You don't need to say anything, Daniel. Just remember that you're not alone, and I hope you'll use this opportunity to continue growing into the remarkable young man I know you are." As Daniel left the principal's office, the sunlight seemed a little brighter, the air a little fresher. He paused for a moment outside the door, taking it all in. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of pain, frustration, and loneliness that had tested him in ways he never thought possible. But now, standing on the other side of those challenges, he felt stronger, more grounded. Walking through the school's garden on his way back to class, Daniel noticed the leaves shimmering under the golden light. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, their petals swaying as if nodding in quiet approval. He felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, but because he had found his place and his voice. The words of Principal Jamie echoed in his mind as he entered the hallway. "You've earned this." And for the first time, Daniel truly believed it. He had taken the first steps of a journey that would undoubtedly be filled with more challenges, but he knew he had the resilience and the support to face them. As he rejoined his classmates, a few of them greeted him with genuine smiles. Sarah waved him over to their table, and he sat down, joining their animated discussion about the upcoming school festival. The world that had once seemed so distant now felt close, familiar, and full of possibility. Daniel smiled to himself. This was only the beginning. Once a student who felt invisible and isolated, Daniel had now become a source of inspiration for his peers and teachers at Green Valley High. He learned that true strength didn't lie solely in enduring hardships, but in standing up and fighting for what was right. His journey, once marked by self-doubt and struggle, was now defined by courage and resilience. Sitting under the familiar branches of the grand maple tree, Daniel gazed at the crimson leaves fluttering gently to the ground. The golden rays of the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the schoolyard, illuminating the serene beauty around him. A soft smile played on his lips as he reflected on his transformation. He hadn't just overcome his challenges, he had found a place where he truly belonged. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sun in hues of amber and rose, Green Valley High basked in the golden hour. The light filtered through the tall trees, casting intricate shadows on the school grounds. A soft breeze carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves, mixed with the faint, sweet aroma of flowers from the garden behind the main building. Daniel sat on his usual stone bench beneath the sprawling maple tree. The bench, now scattered with vibrant red leaves, was where he often came to unwind after school. Today, it felt different. More than just a place of solitude, it had become a symbol of his journey. The once isolated boy had transformed into someone who could inspire change, not only in himself, but also in the community around him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the campus fill his mind. From the distant basketball court came the rhythmic thud of a bouncing ball, mingling with the cheerful laughter of students. Birds chirped melodiously with the treetops, their songs blending seamlessly with the faint hum of chatter echoing through the hallways. It was a symphony of life, a background to his quiet thoughts. Since Ms. Brown's suspension and the introduction of cultural diversity workshops spearheaded by Principal Jamie, Green Valley High had undergone a noticeable transformation. What was once an environment tainted by cliques and quiet biases now carried an air of openness and mutual respect. Students who might never have spoken to each other before were now sharing stories, finding common ground, and building friendships. The multicultural club played a significant role in this change. As a founding member, Daniel had become a leading voice in the group. The club's weekly meetings were held in a sunlit room overlooking the school's vibrant garden, where students from all walks of life came together to share their experiences and perspectives. Daniel was no longer the shy boy who kept to himself at the back of the class. He stood confidently during these meetings, his voice clear and strong as he recounted his journey. He spoke of the lessons his father had taught him, lessons of resilience, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Each time he shared his story, his eyes shone with conviction, and his words resonated deeply with those who listened. One day, during a club meeting, Daniel stood in front of a diverse group of students and teachers. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted his composed demeanor as he began to speak. "My father was a soldier," he said, his voice steady. "He gave his life defending this country and the values it stands for. He taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. For a long time, I struggled to find my place here, but I've learned that sometimes all it takes is one voice to spark change." The room was silent as his words settled, each listener absorbing the weight of his message. Then, one by one, students began to share their own stories of challenges they had faced, biases they had encountered, and the resilience that had carried them through. The conversations were raw and honest, creating a sense of solidarity that bridged their differences. Daniel's transformation didn't just inspire his peers, it also prompted the faculty and administration to rethink how they approached students with unique circumstances. Teachers began attending diversity workshops to better understand and support their students. The school's culture shifted toward one of empathy and inclusivity, where every voice mattered. Miss Johnson, who had become a mentor to Daniel, often used his story as an example in her lessons. "Courage isn't just about big acts," she told her students one day. "It's about the everyday bravery to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Principal Jamie, too, noticed the ripple effect Daniel had created. In a faculty meeting, he remarked, "Daniel's journey reminds us of the power of listening and the importance of creating spaces where students feel seen, heard, and valued. His courage has sparked a change we can all learn from." On the schoolyard bench that afternoon, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. The leaves continued to fall gently around him, painting the ground with vibrant reds and oranges. He thought of the boy he had been just months ago, quiet, unsure, and burdened by the weight of injustice. That boy felt like a distant memory now. Daniel opened his eyes and watched a group of younger students playing nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. He smiled, knowing that they were growing up in a school that was becoming a better, kinder place. For Daniel, the journey was far from over. Challenges would still arise, and there would always be more work to do. But he had found his footing, his voice, and his purpose. And as the sun dipped lower, casting the campus in the warm glow of twilight, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He had finally found a place where he belonged. Green Valley High would never be the same. The lessons learned from Daniel's courage and the collective efforts of the students and faculty had created a foundation for lasting change. And though Daniel's personal journey had been a challenging one, it had also been deeply meaningful, not just for him, but for everyone around him. As the day gave way to evening, Daniel stood, brushing the leaves from his seat. With one last look at the campus bathed in golden light, he walked toward the main building, his steps steady and purposeful. The future awaited, and Daniel was ready to face it head-on, carrying with him the strength, lessons, and connections he had gained along the way. As the semester drew to a close, the school organized a special event on the campus lawn to honor students who had overcome challenges and achieved excellence. The grounds were transformed into a picturesque venue, with neat rows of chairs arranged before a makeshift stage erected under the sprawling branches of the grand maple tree. Colorful ribbons fluttered in the grand maple tree, while twinkling lights strung through the tree's branches cast a warm glow over the scene. The atmosphere was both celebratory and intimate, a perfect reflection of the event's significance. When Daniel's name was announced, the applause that erupted across the crowd was loud and heartfelt. His heart raced as he stood, his legs slightly shaky, but his spirit buoyed by the energy around him. As he ascended the steps to the stage, the world seemed to blur momentarily, the cheering fading into a soft hum that surrounded him like a comforting embrace. "Daniel," Principal Jamie began, his voice steady and clear through the microphone, "you are more than just an outstanding student. You are an inspiration. You have taught us all about courage, perseverance, and the power of unity. On behalf of Green Valley High, I am honored to present you with this special award and to announce that your tuition will be fully covered until your graduation." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause once again, the sound reverberating through the evening air. Standing on the stage, Daniel felt a wave of emotion surge through him. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he bowed slightly, mouthing a heartfelt "thank you." As he scanned the sea of faces before him, Daniel's gaze fell on a few familiar figures. Sarah, her smile wide and genuine. Mrs. Johnson, clapping proudly. And even some classmates who had once kept their distance but now looked at him with newfound respect and warmth. Their expressions were a mixture of admiration and acknowledgement, a silent testament to the journey he had taken to reach this moment. Under the twinkling lights, Daniel stood tall, his heart swelling with a profound sense of accomplishment. He had faced adversity head-on, not just enduring it, but transforming it into a stepping stone for growth and change. For the first time, he felt not just accepted, but celebrated for who he was. Later that evening, as Daniel and his mother drove home, the streetlights flickered past, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the car's interior. Daniel gazed out of the window, the glow of the lights illuminating his thoughtful expression. The award, now resting safely in his lap, felt heavier than its physical weight, a symbol of everything he had fought for. His mother broke the comfortable silence, her voice soft but filled with pride. "Your father would have been so happy to see you today," she said, her eyes briefly flicking to him before returning to the road. "He always believed in you, and so do I." Daniel turned to her, his smile tender and full of gratitude. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. I think I finally believe in myself too." Her words lingered in his mind, filling him with both warmth and determination. The thought of his father watching over him, proud of his achievements and growth, filled Daniel with a sense of purpose. The man who had taught him the value of courage and integrity had been his guiding light, and tonight Daniel felt as though he had truly honored that legacy. As the car drove through the quiet streets, Daniel's thoughts drifted to his earliest days at Green Valley High. The memories of cold stares, whispered judgments, and Miss Brown's harsh words seemed distant now, like shadows from a past he had left behind. Those moments, once so painful, had become the foundation of his resilience, shaping him into the person he was today. What filled his mind now were the friendships he had built, the trust he had earned, and the strength he had found within himself. The fear and loneliness of the past had been replaced by hope and confidence. He no longer felt defined by the struggles he had faced, but by the values he had upheld and the progress he had made. Looking forward, Daniel saw a future brimming with possibility. The support from his school, the love of his family, and the respect of his peers had laid a solid foundation for him to continue growing and pursuing his dreams. More importantly, he felt a deep desire to pay it forward, to use his experiences to inspire and uplift others facing their own battles. That night, as Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the award resting on his desk caught the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the journey that had brought him to this point. He whispered quietly into the stillness of the room, as though speaking to his father, "I'll keep going, Dad. I'll keep fighting for what's right. For you, for me, and for everyone who needs someone to believe in them." The weight of the day's events finally gave way to the peace of sleep, and in his dreams, Daniel saw the maple tree on the schoolyard, its crimson leaves swirling in the breeze. It was no longer just a place of solitude. It was a symbol of his growth and a beacon of hope for what lay ahead. Daniel had found his place, his voice, and his purpose, and the future, vast and boundless, awaited him. At Green Valley High, a fresh energy filled the halls and classrooms. The regular workshops on cultural awareness and inclusion continued, bringing together students and teachers to share stories and reflect on their roles in fostering a respectful, inclusive community. Teachers, inspired by the changes, attended training sessions on embracing diversity and promoting equity in the classroom. Some educators even approached Daniel personally to thank him. His courage had prompted them to re-examine their own practices and rekindled their commitment to creating a fair and supportive learning environment. Daniel often felt humbled by their words, but deep inside, he felt a quiet pride, knowing that his actions had sparked such meaningful change. The transformation extended to his classmates. Those who had once mocked or avoided Daniel now greeted him warmly and included him in group activities. Sarah, who had become one of his closest friends, was a constant presence by his side. Together, they led events for the Multicultural Club, their bond strengthened by a shared commitment to building bridges among their peers. On the final day of the semester, as the campus bustled with students eager for the upcoming holiday break, Daniel stood alone in the schoolyard. The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden glow across the grounds, its rays filtering through the branches of the towering maple tree. The familiar scene, the crimson leaves scattered on the grass, the laughter and chatter of students, the faint rustling of the breeze, felt like a fitting backdrop for his reflections. Daniel gazed out at the school that had been the setting for his most challenging and transformative experiences. He thought back to the boy he had been when he first walked through its gates, shy, uncertain, and weighed down by a sense of isolation. The journey from that point to where he stood now had been anything but easy. The struggles, the moments of doubt, and the pain of being misunderstood were etched in his memory. Yet, it was those very hardships that had shaped him, teaching him resilience, empathy, and the power of standing up for what was right. Bending down, Daniel picked up a vibrant red maple leaf. He turned it over in his hand, its delicate veins catching the fading light. It felt symbolic, a reminder of the growth and change he had experienced, a keepsake of the path he had walked. He whispered softly, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for teaching me how to stand tall and never give up." As the first stars began to glimmer in the twilight sky, Daniel slipped the maple leaf into his pocket and turned toward the school's main building. Around him, students were busy chatting, packing their bags, and saying their goodbyes. The vibrant energy of the schoolyard mirrored the joy and hopefulness he felt within himself. With a smile, Daniel joined the flow of students heading toward the gates. His footsteps were steady, his head held high, and his heart full of optimism. He knew that his journey was far from over. Challenges would come, but so would opportunities to continue growing, learning, and making a difference. Above him, the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of gold and orange, blending seamlessly into the deepening blue of night. The beauty of the moment felt like a promise, a reminder that even after the darkest times, light always returns, stronger and more radiant than before. As Daniel walked into the future, he carried with him not just memories of his struggles, but the lessons they had taught him, the value of persistence, the importance of empathy, and the profound impact one voice can have on an entire community. Life is a journey filled with challenges, and every obstacle we overcome offers valuable lessons. Daniel's story is not just a personal journey. It reflects broader themes of justice, resilience, and the importance of courage. Through his experiences, we can draw profound insights that apply to our own lives. One of the most powerful lessons from Daniel's story is the importance of courage when facing injustice. At school, Daniel endured discrimination from someone who should have been his guide and protector, his teacher. Instead of silently accepting the mistreatment, Daniel found the strength to speak up and share his struggles with Principal Jamie. By voicing his concerns, Daniel didn't just change his own situation, he initiated a ripple effect that opened the eyes of his school community. This demonstrates that when we have the courage to speak the truth, we can protect not only ourselves, but also inspire others to recognize and confront the injustices around them. In life, standing up against authority or unfairness is never easy. Fear of consequences can make silence tempting, but as Daniel's story shows, silence allows injustice to persist. Courage, on the other hand, is the key to driving meaningful change. Resilience is one of Daniel's defining traits. Despite being ignored, criticized, and unfairly accused, he refused to give up. Instead, Daniel channeled his energy into proving his worth through actions rather than words. His perseverance not only helped him overcome his challenges, but also inspired those around him. Classmates, teachers, and even the school administration began to recognize the quiet strength that Daniel carried within himself. In our own lives, we will inevitably face moments when it feels as though the world is against us. Like Daniel, we must remember that persistence can turn adversity into growth. By standing firm and continuing to push forward, we can emerge stronger and wiser. At the beginning of his journey, Daniel felt isolated, as though he were the only one unwelcome at school. But when he opened up and shared his story, the tides began to shift. His classmates grew to understand him, and their relationships blossomed into genuine connections. The Multicultural Club, which Daniel joined, became a hub for students from diverse backgrounds to come together. Through shared stories and mutual respect, they built a community that celebrated differences. This sense of belonging gave Daniel the strength to thrive and contributed to a better, more inclusive school environment for everyone. Daniel's experience is a reminder that no one can face challenges entirely alone. Support from a community, whether it's family, friends, or colleagues, provides the motivation and resources we need to overcome hardships. When we come together, we can create positive change that benefits not just ourselves, but the entire group. Another important lesson from Daniel's story is the pivotal role education plays in fostering fairness and inclusion. After Ms. Brown's suspension and the implementation of cultural diversity workshops, the atmosphere at Green Valley High shifted dramatically. These efforts highlighted that education isn't just about academic achievement, it's also about nurturing values like empathy, respect, and equality. Under Principal Jamie's leadership, the school transformed into a place where every student felt valued and supported. This underscores the potential of education to challenge prejudice and build a more just society. When done right, education doesn't just prepare students for exams, it prepares them for life as compassionate and ethical individuals who can contribute positively to the world around them. Daniel's story teaches us that even the smallest actions can lead to significant change. His decision to speak up, join the Multicultural Club, and persevere in his studies set off a chain reaction that transformed Green Valley High. This serves as a reminder that no effort is too small to make a difference. When approached with determination and purpose, even modest acts can inspire a broader impact. Each of us has the potential to drive meaningful change. All we need to do is take that first step. One of the brightest points in Daniel's journey is the kindness and support he received from Principal Jamie, Miss Johnson, and friends like Sarah. Their encouragement and empathy gave Daniel the strength to navigate his most challenging moments and rediscover his confidence. This reminds us that a simple act of kindness, a word of encouragement, a gesture of understanding, or even just listening can change someone's life. Kindness enriches the lives of those we help and in turn makes us better individuals. Daniel's journey is a powerful reminder that life isn't always easy, but we all have the strength to change it for the better. Courage, resilience, and community are the core values that enable us to overcome even the toughest challenges. Daniel showed us that one person's bravery can spark transformation in an entire community. More importantly, he inspired us all to believe that everyone deserves respect and a sense of belonging. If you're ever facing injustice or feeling isolated, remember, you are not alone. There are people willing to stand by your side. You just need to find the courage to reach out. And sometimes, your actions, no matter how small, can inspire change and positively impact those around you. As Daniel's father once said, "Life isn't always easy, but as long as you don't give up, nothing can stop you from moving forward." Daniel's story isn't just about a boy overcoming injustice. It's a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and unity. It reminds us that, no matter how daunting the challenge, facing it with determination can lead to a brighter, better future. If Daniel's story has resonated with you, share this message to spread its valuable lessons. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more inspiring stories. Let's continue building a world where respect, kindness, and fairness are the cornerstones of our community. Together, we can make a difference.